Welcome to Resilient. My name is Mike Kearney, the Risk and Financial Advisory CMO. Unprecedented times. That's why we're sticking with a focus on the impact of COVID-19. Over the last month, we have covered a number of important topics, everything from transitioning to a virtual workforce, closing the books virtually, the future of supply chain, scenario planning, the CARES Act, and more. Today, I'm talking with Katie Pavlovsky, a principal in a risk and financial advisory business who brings a unique perspective on how companies can recover losses sustained from the COVID-19 crisis. Joining Katie is Vincent Morgan, the former managing partner of Pillsbury's Houston office. He has advised clients and has helped them obtain insurance and other recoveries associated with several well-known crises. Today, we're going to cover a number of topics, including what can leaders do to better understand loss exposure and recovery coverage? What data should organizations be tagging? Coordination with other funding sources, such as CARES and FEMA, and future consideration for insurance coverage. Just like other conversations in this series, we're going to be doing this virtually. I'm sitting in my office. And even though we're not all in the same room, the audio has been quite good today. So let's get to it. Our conversation with Katie and Vince. So I'm sitting here in California in my office, and I think it's week 6 at the stay-home order. And one of the questions that I've loved to start off these conversations with, because I'm thinking about it every day, is what do you do to take care of yourself and your well-being during these challenging times? So let me start with our first guest, Katie. What are you doing?
So it's interesting, Mike, because I assumed that in the busy travel world of consultants that I was getting little to no exercise. And what I realized after the stay at home and after sitting through 12 or 14 hours of calls at a time, that I actually was getting more exercise than I thought. So I've actually picked up running, and I'm trying to hit about 4 miles a day. And I'm also trying to focus on healthy eating.
Hey, Vince, how about you? What are you doing to take care of yourself?
Yeah, same report. I actually got up this morning. It was nice, cool weather here in Houston today, and I got up and I headed outside. And then I'm trying to eat better. I wouldn't say it's a success yet, but I'm making small progress on that front too.
See, I think the exercise I've got down, it's the fact that my wife is now baking all the time that's killing me. So maybe they balance out. How are leaders wrapping their arms around the magnitude of losses from the pandemic? And obviously it's significant, but what are you seeing leaders do to kind of size it up? Katie, what are you seeing?
I'll just lay a little bit of context here. The unforeseeable has happened. And so we're experiencing a current loss environment that's unprecedented when you consider that it is across all geographies and across all industries. And typically, when our organizations and companies are working through an insured loss, they may be dealing with key suppliers that have been impacted or key customers or key operations. Never has it been so pervasive. So what we're experiencing and what we're seeing is that the traditional mechanisms for valuing losses and the teams that are being used are being expanded, and they're really looking at it holistically across all of their businesses and products and operations and geographies, including their suppliers and customers. And so this is, I think, been an exercise in understanding the extreme, and I think they're also, and for good reason, looking at lessons learned and how this is going to change business and the way that they plan for and value losses in the future.
Hey, Vince, one of the things that my clients are specifically struggling with is the data nature of this and all of the analysis of the losses that may be claimed, whether it's under insurance policy or some of these under other funding sources that we're going to be talking about. What guidance do you have for clients when they're starting to think about the level of detail that they should be capturing so that they could substantiate their claims or obviously draw on some of these other funding sources?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's the right thing to be looking at. And I'd say 2 things. Number one, is you need to set up as early as you can, and everybody's, sort of doing the best they can these days in the midst of all this, but you want to set up as early as you can a systematic method to track these losses across your organization. But the second thing is you got to figure out what you're tracking them for, because that helps drive how, what you track and how you do it. And that goes back to the first question about, where are you on the insurance front, right? And to get to the answer of that, I mean, a lot of people have been relying on industry, they rely on assumptions about what their policies do or do not cover, and we don't think that's the right approach. We think the only way to properly do that is to go through the hard work of looking at each and every policy that the company has that might provide coverage and figuring out what that is, and then that will drive your tracking situation. And then the second thing is, again, these other funding sources we've talked about. Again, they cover some things, they don't cover other things. They have coordination of benefits between sources, and they're trying to avoid overlapping or duplicative recoveries, no double dipping, that sort of thing. And again, that's the kind of thing that drives what you track and how you track it. And you really can't do that unless you've gotten your arms around what might be covered here and how do I approach this. So, you've got to do both, and you've got to do them at the same time.
Hey, Vince, for somebody that doesn't spend a lot of time looking at these type of insurance policies, can you just talk about the magnitude of effort and if there's any, best practices at looking at kind of a sheer volume of insurance policies? Is it a pretty straightforward effort, or is it fairly extensive, or maybe somewhere in between?
The answer is it's not. The cost isn't really that high on the front end on this triage process of just going through your policies. And we at my firm have looked at hundreds of these things over the last few weeks for different clients, and we set up a triage team that goes through and looks for specific things, and we can tell pretty quickly, is the light red, yellow, or green in terms of, are you likely to have a strong claim for coverage? Do you have real challenges, or is it somewhere in between? And we've seen sort of three buckets. And you can segregate the policies into those three categories of ones that affirmatively cover this sort of event. We've got others that are silent, and then the third bucket are ones that exclude them. But that triage process, usually it's a minimal investment of time, and then you can figure out if the light is yellow or green. Then you can talk about next steps. So I would encourage any company that's looking at this not to be fearful of whether it pays off or not. You can at least have some certainty as its own benefit here, and so I would encourage companies to do that work without anxiety about it being a longer process than it needs to be.
I do think it's really critical that companies are mapping their exposures and really thinking about their exposures, whether it is income impacts, whether it's expenses, whether it's claims, and that they're looking across the business and in certain cases across the supply chain. And taking that step first and then considering their insurance policies against those exposures. I'd also add that on the data side, it's probably more in the valuation where the opportunity comes to really think about how can you automate the process and reduce the manual nature of it, and think about the opportunities to pull from your enterprise resource planning, your ERP systems, or to leverage technologies that can serve as a blanket across disparate data sources, so that as you're valuing those exposures, that you've got a ready way to pull the data and to look at it holistically, and that not only are you capturing the data, but you've got the ability to model it and monitor it for multiple purposes. And the good news is that with technologies today and with the advancements today, it's easy to pull from those systems and to reduce the burden as well. And so whether it's because the volume up front on the insurance policy side is not as significant, or where the volume does become more significant, but there are ways to leverage tools. To Vince's point, this is a place where companies want to be thorough in their exploration of the exposures, of the valued losses, and the insurance policies, or other recovery mechanisms that may support, reducing those losses.
Katie, you mentioned tools. So if I'm listening to this, I'm like, okay, that sounds great, but I don't have a tool. Are these fairly ubiquitous? Are these tools that organizations can go get in the marketplace? Is it usually through consultants? What type of tools are you talking about, and where do they get them?
Right. And so there are custom tools. There are tools that you can buy that are specific to capturing claims data within the marketplace. It's important as you're thinking about the data aggregation that you're considering that most insurance companies and the government will have some of these stipulations as well, that you're not only collecting the data, but you're preserving the data that is being used to substantiate your analysis. And so there are custom tools, but again, in today's digital and analytical world, it's not difficult to have bridge technologies through analytics that serve as a blanket across your data to pull it together so that you can look at it and house it and analyze it on a continuing basis. And the continuing basis is very critical because this loss is ongoing for many and will continue to be. And so having that capability, again, to automate, reduce the manual nature of it is going to be very important and will pay off in terms of return on the back end for small investments up front, either hiring these capabilities, leveraging your own internal systems, or using analytics.
Just to echo those comments, that's exactly the right way to look at it in terms of a small investment up front will pay dividends on the back end, because just having gone through the number of claims that we've gone through, and then also other avenues such as FEMA and similar initiatives, whenever you're trying to recover through these mechanisms, a well-documented, well-substantiated, well-supported data set that explains, here are the losses that we are seeking to recover, here's where they came in, here's the documentation for it, here's the backup for it, here's the support. Those are the ones that get processed as painlessly as possible and as quickly as possible. And so one of the keys here, right, is if this were an ordinary loss, you would say, that's okay, we'll just work through it in due course. But given this situation with no meaningful end in sight yet, speed is a huge premium, so I think that's a huge key to success here.
Hey, Vince, just to build on that, my guess would be, given the fact that there's a lot of other organizations that are going to be presenting their claims or looking for money from the government, you're probably competing with more organizations now. And so making sure that it's tight and clean is probably more important with this crisis than others. Is that true?
You see it in hurricanes and earthquakes and other sort of catastrophe losses. But here, it's happening everywhere. And so, again, the ones that someone can look at and say, this seems like it's well-supported and well-substantiated, I feel like I can confidently sign off on this. You want to do everything you can to remove speed bumps along the way.
Katie, one of the things we've been talking about is the fact that there are different sources that can help address some of the losses that organizations are having. Obviously, we're talking about insurance today, but I have a client that is looking at insurance. There's stipulation for money from CARES. They're even looking at FEMA. What guidance would you give an organization in trying to make sense of all those funding sources, and if there's any priority, or how you just get your mind around where you go for the funding?
Well, and part of that is, what have you done to stand up your team to really understand your exposures? But whether it's an insurance policy or government relief in any form, or perhaps remedy through, contracts or whatever the situation might be, they're very important assets right now when companies are short on cash or they're trying to manage their cash positions, because certain of them offer cash advance types of opportunities. They're important assets when you think about the opportunity to mitigate your losses and to make your organization as whole as possible. And many organizations right now are looking at their policies and trying to understand them in the context of this loss. And what I'd suggest is position, assuming that it's important to calculate your losses and that there will be some recovery mechanism, because there are some atypical or unprecedented activities going on right now. So as this environment is continuing to evolve, it's important to have a real-time view of what your situation is so that you can be nimble as various relief mechanisms are made available, and to Vince's point, be positioned to be an early recipient of cash advances or claim payments to mitigate your company's current losses.
Let's go back to Vince. Vince, I would imagine that this is a significant compliance activity. We talked a bit about making sure that you've got claims that could be substantiated, but my guess is that there's a number of compliance requirements and things that organizations should be thinking about. What would you guide, or what guidance would you provide a client from a compliance perspective?
Yeah, that's certainly one of the things you need to be thinking about now. And the interesting thing on that is the time horizon is in some cases much longer than you might expect, right? So, for example, FEMA right now is still looking at things from Superstorm Sandy, which was in 2012, right? And we're now in 2020. And so you have to kind of go at it with that mindset. That goes back to the point Katie was making earlier about preserving data and making sure that you can document this in some cases maybe years from now, which is not a normal thing that most companies are typically sort of expecting to be able to do. But yeah, you've got to, from a compliance standpoint, for example, if an organization is eligible for FEMA aid, then one of the things that FEMA looks at is are there insurance recoveries that are available to offset some of the losses? So in other words, FEMA says, here's some money to get back on your feet and to maybe mitigate against future storms, but with that comes a string of you've got to go, and if there's available insurance proceeds, you've got to go collect those, and then FEMA will go through a back-end reconciliation process with you. One of the other things to think about is, procurement guidelines in terms of, opening it to bidding and things of that nature, as opposed to, just deciding I'm going to give the contract to this other company that I have been working with. That may well be a great company for you to place a contract, but there may also be, bidding and procurement guidelines that you've got to keep in mind. So this is kind of the same thing in terms of tracking losses. This is maybe thinking of it as tracking obligations and what you have to do to be able to demonstrate, yes, we looked at our insurance recovery, we looked at our insurance policies and our program and came to the conclusion that we had this coverage or we didn't have coverage or whatever. I mean, whatever the answer is, you've got to be able to demonstrate that, how you work through the process. And so those are the kinds of things. Some of these funding sources are wonderful, really. It can make the difference in countless ways, but some of these things do come with strings attached, and you need to be prepared to comply with those.
You know what I'm beginning to take away from both of your comments is that you really need to be thoughtful at the outset when you kind of want to run and just start getting, these funding sources. But I hear that there's some guidance on being very strategic, very thoughtful, going back to making sure that you understand your insurance coverage, but just also understanding the full scope of the rules. Do you guys have guidance on that? Meaning it's like go slow to go fast, but that's definitely a theme that's beginning to emerge. Any thoughts, or am I on the right track?
You are, and look, this is an important time to not go it alone. And so having external data points and benefiting from understanding how organizations within your sector or across industries are approaching this, whether it's how you value the losses or think about the loss scenarios, or whether it's how these various relief mechanisms are applied, are helpful data points that outside providers can bring. I think internally it's very important that you've got a robust team and it represents the various parts of your business as you're working through some of these strategic decisions. And so while it might seem costly to bring finance and accounting and legal and compliance and supply chain and the operations online together in a working situation where you're communicating, daily, weekly as it relates to the extent of the losses or the magnitude of the losses. I think the concerted effort in terms of truly understanding your organizational exposure and how you can mitigate it will generate more significant returns in the long run.
So Katie, you're almost saying you need to do a completeness test. How do I, if I'm a leader, get my arms around all of these things that potentially could be scoped in?
Well, and that comes back to leveraging the team that you've pulled together across the business to explore your exposures. And if you've got a team and if the information is channeling out from the various geographies to support the global reach, if you will, of those exposures, then that's a good starting point. And it also comes back to the tools that you're using to house the data that is, helping you to identify your losses and the ultimate exposures, and the importance of having something that's centralized, whether it's the team that's identifying and undertaking the analysis or how you're storing it. And then I think from a leadership standpoint, even considering the strategy and where you're trying to take your business is going to be very critical, because as you're going through and valuing the loss, it will be important to have not only the baseline of where had you been prior to the coronavirus and COVID, and then also where were you going and how has this impacted you strategically? Those are going to be very important considerations as you look at what your ultimate exposure has been.
Yeah, and I would just sort of bookend that with a couple of thoughts. I mean, I think most companies, are pretty good at planning, and they spend a lot of time trying to see where things are headed, both in their industry and their own business and otherwise. So there's no reason you shouldn't use that same skill set that most companies already have pretty well developed. You use that same approach here. And that gets back to the other point that Katie was talking about. This is not the time to do it alone. And I would say 2 points on that. One is some companies have these resources internally, and that's wonderful, but they may be completely overwhelmed with, other tasks right now and just not have the bandwidth that they normally do, given the, response efforts that are, across the spectrum here. The second thing is some of these things require very specialized expertise that may not be available in-house, whether busy or not. Whether that's outside coverage counsel, that represents policyholders. Some companies have that expertise, not all of them do. And so you really got to figure out, what are the people that I need to have help me work through these problems and get them on board. And again, if you do it in a systematic way, the investment is normally, well, more than pays for itself with the return that you get down the road.
Katie, I want to go back to you and really talk about the importance of documentation and the accounting elements. And there's this concept of setting up a loss accounting system. What is that specifically, and what are some of the benefits that you see?
Sure. And basically what it is a stand-up of the ability to separate your losses and the impacts associated with COVID-19 from your business as usual. And so it's setting up GL accounts that help you track the expenses, help you understand the revenue and the income impacts, that help you understand the claims and the liabilities and the outstanding obligations. And the opportunity is to set those up specifically so that you can start tracking and coding the various loss attributes against them. It provides the benefit of not only supporting your insurance claim or pursuit of government relief funds, but also helps with financial reporting and disclosures and other aspects that require a real-time view of the losses and the impacts on the business.
Final question to the both of you. I'm going to start with Katie. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of time to look back. Clients right now, organizations are knee-deep in their insurance policies, and my guess is there's probably going to be some lessons learned. What would you recommend to organizations in the future as it relates to their insurance policies, and what do you think that they can learn kind of from the current crisis? Katie, let me start with you.
Well, this is the ultimate loss scenario valuation that
right.
that can occur. And so what most organizations do is they go through and they think about where their exposures are and what they think their maximum or ultimate losses could be coming out of an exposure. And I think through this exercise, it's very important that organizations and companies do not lose sight of what they've learned, so that as they're considering their risk management forward, whether it's through an insurance policy or self-insurance or even managing risk through other mechanisms, that they have a view of the losses that they experienced here. And as digital and analytics and the technologies continue to mature, I think the opportunity is to not only use this as your baseline for thinking about exposures forward, but also how you can set up continuous monitoring procedures, leveraging the technologies so that you continue to enhance your real-time view and your predictive capabilities around those loss exposures, and how successful you are at not only managing them but preventing them, because that's where this will go.
Vince, I'll let you close it. What are your thoughts?
Having everybody have a better level of contract certainty is a great thing. And so I think we will get there either through the legislative efforts or through just the industry itself, or the insurance industry responding to this. But we'll have a clearer picture going forward that companies can use as they try and think through the next one. And they'll have more certainty on this front, at least.
Fantastic. Katie and Vince, thank you very much. I'm going to say it a bit facetiously, but you've made insurance fun and interesting today. I know that for my clients, I'll tell you, there are a lot of questions that I was asking, and I was thinking specifically of a client. So very, very valuable advice and guidance, and I thank you for that. This is a stressful and unpredictable time for all organizations. The situation is fluid and no one has all the answers, but as we dig deeper into the crisis, we will continue to bring real insights from leaders on the front line. We have got a backlog of incredible guests that we're continuing to work through. There's so much to consider, and we encourage you to stay tuned as we bring more insights from leaders across disciplines and go deeper into each of these and other defining issues facing businesses during the crisis. For more insights across all aspects of this topic, go to Deloitte.com and our COVID page. You can also find Resilient on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and even Spotify. If you have any stories you want to hear more about, suggest them at Deloitte.com on our Resilient page. And until next time, stay safe and remain resilient.